to the Jordan's Principle Individual Application presentation. This presentation will share general information about Jordan's Principle, teach you how to fill out an application form, and explain what other documents you might need for an application. Jordan River Anderson was born in Norway House Cree Nation, Manitoba in 1999 with multiple disabilities, and so he stayed at the hospital since birth. When he was 2 years old, the doctor said that he could move to a special home for his medical needs. However, the federal government and the provincial government could not agree on who would pay for his at home care. Unfortunately, Jordan passed away in the hospital at the age of 5, and in 2007, the House of Commons passed Jordan's Principle in memory of Jordan. It was a commitment that First Nations children would get the products, services, and supports they need when they needed them. So let's take a minute to think about that. Here's a Cree child, free to leave the hospital and return home to meet his extended family and his community, but he could not because two governments were fighting over who would pay for his home care. This is what we're here to talk to you about today: how to help children get the services they deserve and need to flourish, because that's Jordan River Anderson's legacy. Jordan's Principle is a child first initiative that was created to give support where there's gaps in service. It's for children 0 to 17, and it's a law in Canada. To get some more general information on Jordan's Principle, I will go over some facts. Did you know that you don't need to be living on territory to be eligible? You are eligible to apply if you are living on or off territory, in or out of community. You do not need to have a disability to be eligible or a diagnosis to apply to Jordan's Principle. You also don't need to have a band number to be eligible. If the child does not have one yet, a parent can put their band number on the application form instead. Lastly, the Cree Health Board, Jordan's Principle, we do not make the decision. It's Indigenous Services Canada who makes all decisions on applications. Who can fill out an application? Here's a list of different people who can make an application. Parent or guardians. If you're 16 years older, you can fill it out yourself. Grandparents or family members, professionals, and community workers can apply on behalf of a child as long as you have the consent of the parent or the guardian. We're now going to go over the steps of making an application. Step 1 is identifying the need. And you're going to want to ask yourself, is it a gap in service? What is it that the child needs right now? Can it be met with other services, public services? If the answer is no, maybe there's no funding, there's no resources, or maybe the waiting list is too long, this could be a reason to apply to Jordan's Principle. So just to recap, Jordan's Principle is there to provide services and items to children when there's a gap in service. And this gap could mean that there's no funding, so there's no money to cover what is being requested. There could be a gap in human resources, meaning that there's no one to fill the position. For example, potentially in your community, there's no child psychologist, or maybe there's no art therapist working in the community right now. That would be an example of a position and a gap. The last type of gap could be a time gap. So maybe the waiting list for speech language pathology is too long. Your child has been waiting either months, years, and this is affecting their development. Some gaps in service and applications that have been made in the past include specialized day programs, specialized medical equipment, medication, specialized evaluations, reports or consultations, programs that are based on cultural beliefs, practices. Respite care is also a big one, training for staff, services from elders, assistive technology, and many more. You might hear the word specialized a lot in all of the examples that I just gave, and that's because many specialized services are considered private services. This means that they're not covered by public services or Cree non-insured health benefits. So if there's no funding For these types of specialized services, that's considered a gap in service. So you could apply to Jordan's principle for that. Step two is to request an application form. You can email our general email, which is on the screen, or if you're a Cree Health Board worker or if you're working with a community worker, they can find the form in Alfresco by searching Jordan's Principal Package. So, step three would be filling out the form. And there's three categories of people who can fill out an application form. One would be the child who's over 16 years old, so you check the first box. The second would be the parent or the guardian. And the third category is an authorized representative. This could be a professional, a community worker, or Jordan's principal representative. We're going to practice filling out an application together. And in this example here, we've checked off authorized representative. So our role as an authorized representative is to put into writing the parent's request or what the child needs. So, for our case, the father informs us that his daughter has a doctor referral to see a speech language pathologist. But as of now, there's many speech language pathologists on territory, and some of them are traveling, doing online therapy, or visiting the community. So, how is this father's request a gap in service? Let's say we continue talking with him and find out that the daughter has been on a waiting list for at least 2 years. And the dad doesn't want to wait any longer. And so he found a speech language pathologist in Montreal that he wants to take his daughter to. Because this is a specialized service, it's not covered by Cree non-insured health benefits. Because it's not covered, that means that the travel fees for the appointment are not covered either. So the family would have to, one, pay for their own speech language assessment or therapy, and two, cover the costs to travel to the appointment. So this is why the father is making a request to Jordan's principal or filling out the application form to help pay for those two gaps in service, which is the assessment and the travel fees. So for this application, as a community worker filling out the form, we're going to want to consider assessment funding for the appointment, transportation, hotel, and meals. So with all of that in mind, we're going to continue filling out the form. Section 1 would be filling out the child's information. So you put down the child's name, family name, birthday is very important, and the band number if there's any. As I mentioned, I think at the beginning, if the child doesn't have a band number, that's okay. There's a space on the right for the parents to put theirs. Section 2 would be for the parent or guardian information. This is really important to include, even if you're applying as an authorized representative on behalf of the family. It's important that we have the parental information on the form so that we can contact them in case it's approved, maybe to do the booking or the travels, or even to confirm if the items were received. It's also important to have their information in case we can't contact the community worker or the representative who submitted the application. Section 3 is where the authorized representative's information would go. So for our example, it would be where we would put our information. This is also helpful, especially for the PPROs who review the application, because we know who to contact. And it helps Indigenous Services Canada understand who's submitting the request, how they know the child, and how to get in contact if they have any questions. Section 4, the reason for the request. In this example, the child's unmet needs are speech evaluation and travel fees. As we mentioned before, the child's been on a waiting list for at least 2 years, so the speech evaluation is an unmet need, and Cree non-insured health benefits, Cree patient services, will not be covering the travel fees. The next question is an assessment, prescription, or referral attached? For our example, we could ask the father if he consents to including the doctor referral for the SLP assessment. If he does, you'll just circle yes and attach your referral in your application. Section 5, request information. This is where you briefly describe the request. So here, speech language pathology assessment and the travel costs to Montreal. Below that, you're going to put the request and the associated cost. So I put the cost of the assessment and the total cost of travels. And later on, I'll show you the breakdown of the travel fees in the following slides. So for our example, there's nothing in the middle column because the frequency is only one time. They're only going there once. But it's possible that the speech language pathologist maybe recommends that the child participate in speech therapy. And here the frequency might be once a week or once a month. At the bottom, where it says total amount requested, is where you're going to add up each requested service or product separately for your grand total. Underneath that is a section to provide any other details that's relevant to the request. Here you might add that the child is entitled to an escort, which explains why the travels are budgeted for two people, or you might include any other information you think is relevant that you want to share. Section 6 is the request history. In this section, Indigenous Services Canada wants to know if you have looked for other sources of funding. In our example of the SLP, you probably did not request funding elsewhere, but an example of when you might have clicked yes would be if you applied to Cree non-insured health benefits for orthodontics and you were refused. So in that case, you would click yes and you would attach your denied claim to your application. Another example is if there was funding, but it did not cover your entire request. So Korean IHB does cover a certain amount of money for eyeglasses, but let's say it doesn't cover the entirety. You could request the remaining funds through Jordan's Principle. And you would put in your application that you received $175 for eyeglasses, and that's why you're requesting the remaining through Jordan's Principle. Number 7 would be the declaration of the information and the signature, which is the last part of the form. The parent or the child who's 16 years older can sign and date the form. And it's very important to have the parent's signature, especially if you're an authorized representative or community worker filling it out on their behalf, because you want to make sure that they've seen the application and they're okay with what you have put. Once you've finished completing the application form, you're going to want to think about your budget. So, one important document that needs to be included in the application is a quotation. So, for our example, we used a service provider, a speech language pathology assessment. So, the service provider is the person or the company that's going to be giving you the service. So, in our case, it would be Anderson Therapy Services for speech language. And this is an example of a quotation, so how much it's going to cost. Don't be shy to email the clinic or the business directly and ask them for a quotation. Now, if you're applying for travel fees, you need to include a budget so we know exactly how you plan on traveling and the breakdown of the travel rates. So you can contact us for the different rates for transportation, accommodation, meal rates, and we can support you in filling out the budget. But here, as an example, I included flights from Chibougamau to Montreal, the cost of a hotel for 2 nights, and meals for 2 days. At the bottom, I put the total cost. To find out a cost for a flight, you can go to Air Quebec, and on the homepage, you could search a flight, you would put in your location, where you're traveling to, all that good stuff. Hit search and then choose the flight you want, one that works for you. I would definitely suggest picking Economy Flex. It's a bit more expensive, but it allows you to be flexible so you can change your dates. If you don't know your travel dates, don't worry about it. You can just put an estimate of how much your flight will be and let us know as soon as you plan on traveling what your dates are so that we can book your flights. So the same thing goes for a hotel quotation. You can go on the website, find a hotel, put in your dates, number of guests, and find out the total. For hotel rooms, it's important that it has to be a standard room. There's also quotations from sales providers. So the example we just discussed was an application for a service. But what if we needed a product or an item? So let's say after the assessment, the therapist recommends an iPad and a communication app, WordQ. These can also be Jordan's principal applications. In this example, the gap in service would be the funding for the products. For us to order the items, you can email the company and ask for a quotation to be sent to you. Here's an example of a quote that I requested from a website for the program called WordQ. So I went on their webpage, I found the contact us, which had their email, and then I just sent a quick email asking for a quotation for the cost of WordQ. Quotes are really great and helpful for us because they already include the shipping, taxes, and any other fees, which makes it much easier for us to order and process your orders. But some companies like Amazon, they won't give you quotations. You just add things to your cart, right? So in that case, you would fill out this section, which is on the application form. It's very helpful to have the website, so amazon.ca, the product code, if there's a number, the item, an iPad, let's say, the quantity, and most importantly, the link. These are much better than screenshots because the administrative technician who's going to order these items can just copy paste and know exactly what it is that you had requested. When calculating the cost of your products, it's very important to include the cost of shipping, taxes. We suggest that you put your shipping to the address on the screen here to the public health building in Miss Dissany because we have all the items shipped to Miss Dissany so that we can approve the invoice, pay the supplier, look at the package and make sure everything is there, and then we send it to you. Then you have the consent form. This needs to be signed by parents and submitted with the application. So here you have the option to choose who you would like to consent for the sharing of information. We put different entities and a space blank. It's just helpful for us to be able to share information with certain organizations so that we can check the gap in service and make sure that your application gets approved. We also want to support sharing of information to resources that can benefit your child. But that is absolutely your choice. You get to decide who you consent to share information with. So in this case, Jordan's principal, Cree Health Board, and the Speech Language Pathology Clinic. Those are all the main steps in making an application. But as a reminder, we're going to take it from the top. So these are all the things that you need to make sure that your application has for it to be complete. You want your application form filled out and signed, your budget and your quotations. So the travel budget that had the breakdown of the meals, the flights, all of that, with which also had the quotations for Air Quebec and the hotel. There was also the quotation from Anderson Therapy Clinic, which explained the cost of the speech language pathology assessment. You also want your signed consent form so that we can share information with Indigenous Services Canada and other organizations to check the gap in service. Then you want to also include other support documents. Supporting documents can be different for each application, but for our example, it could be the referral letter from the doctor to go see a speech language pathologist. Lastly, and one of the most important pieces is the support letter. And to learn more about that, there's a whole other presentation on the support letter and how to write a strong letter, what to include, that kind of stuff. When you've completed your application, you can send it to our email. As a PPRO, a project planning and research officer for Jordan's Principal, we can offer families, workers, and communities a wide range of services. Most importantly, we help support you in the application process. We help filling out the form, getting the documents you need, answering questions, supporting you in getting your quotations or your travel budget. And we review all the applications before we submit them to Indigenous Services Canada. But we can also provide you or your community with a general presentation on Jordan's Principle, set up a booth at a community event, provide a workshop, and much more. Here's where you can contact us. Remember, please send all your applications, questions, concerns to this general email. And you can also find us online. Miigwech, thank you for listening in today. We hope to hear from you soon.